I stood at the threshold of the house I once called mine and smelled the faint trace of lavender mixed with bleach. The scent was new. The rugs were new. Even the pictures on the wall had been rearranged. Where my family once hung in mismatched frames, now there were carefully curated prints, glossy, identical, like a showroom trying to pretend it was a home. I placed my hand on the doorknob, still cool from the fog that rolled in from the California coast each night. My knuckles ached. The brass squeaked when I turned it. No one inside seemed to hear me come in. From the kitchen floated the sound of laughter, plates clinking, wine glasses raised. My daughter's voice, high practice, coated in sugar for her guests. I paused in the hallway, clutching the strap of my worn leather purse. There were shoes lying neatly by the entryway, not mine. They were small, fashionable, strappy heels in rows like museum pieces. My boots, the ones I'd walked in for years, were shoved to the corner, half hidden behind the umbrella stand. I bent to straighten them, but my knees stiffened and I let them be. Through the open archway I could see her. Marissa, my daughter, 45 this year. She wore a silk blouse, the kind that whispered against her skin when she moved. Her hair was smoothed into a sleek bun. She was pouring wine into glasses, laughter spilling from her like champagne fizz. A woman beside her, maybe a coworker, asked, "How do you do it all?" Marissa tilted her chin. "You just have to know what's worth keeping, and what's worth letting go." The room laughed politely. She didn't see me standing in the shadow of the hallway, not at first. And then I heard it. The words that felt like shards of glass sliding into my chest. "She used to stay in here," Marissa said, motioning toward the spare room with her glass. "But she doesn't really need it anymore. She's too old to matter. And besides, the kids need a playroom." The table erupted in laughter again. I gripped the strap of my purse tighter. Too old to matter. My room, the small corner of the house that had been mine, was gone. Transformed into bright plastic toys and beanbags, its history erased. I didn't speak. I didn't walk in and demand recognition. I simply stood there, invisible, watching my daughter erase me with one careless sentence. And that, my dear, is how a woman like me, once a mother, once a worker with strong hands, once a heartbeat that kept this family alive, could become nothing more than an inconvenience, an afterthought, a burden hidden behind polite laughter. If you've ever felt that sting, if you've ever watched someone you raised dismiss you as though your years made you less, then I need you to stay. Because stories like mine are not rare. They live in the corners of so many houses. They echo in kitchens and get buried under birthday cakes and mortgage payments. And here, on Grandma True Stories, they will be told. Subscribe if you haven't already, because silence is how these stories die. And I will not be silent anymore. I took a step backward, into the hallway, into the shadows where mothers are often pushed. I could hear Marissa's voice carrying above the clatter of silverware. She had a new promotion, a new contract, a new house in Los Angeles, bigger than the one her father and I had worked 2 jobs to afford in Oakland when she was young. Her laughter wrapped around her guests like a bow, flawless and effortless. But her words still echoed, too old to matter. I drifted toward the garage, the only space no one cared enough to decorate. The cement floor was cracked. The smell of oil lingered from when her father used to tinker with engines. Against one wall was a fold-out cot, the thin mattress sagging in the middle. That was where I slept now. Not in the guest room, not in the house itself. In the garage, where forgotten tools and cardboard boxes gathered dust. I sat on the cot and ran my fingers over the quilt I had stitched 20 years ago. Each patch was a square of memory, a piece of Marissa's childhood dress, a corner of her father's old work shirt, a scrap from my apron. She had once wrapped herself in it during winter storms when the heater broke. Now it lay folded, ignored, as if the memories inside it had no weight. The voices from the kitchen swelled again. To Marissa, someone toasted. To her success. Glasses clinked. Cheers rang out. I closed my eyes and thought of the times I had celebrated alone. Birthdays spent with nothing but a candle stuck in a slice of bread. Anniversaries marked only in silence because her father was on a double shift at the factory. I thought of the years I saved every penny for her education, every dime for her safety. And now, here she was, raising a glass to herself while erasing the hands that built the foundation she stood on. I heard footsteps approach the garage door. For a moment, I thought she might come looking for me, maybe with a plate of food, maybe with a word of acknowledgement. The door creaked open slightly, but it wasn't her. It was her son, my grandson, barely 8 years old. He poked his head in, holding a juice box. "Grandma," he whispered. "Yes, baby," I said softly. "Mom says I'm not supposed to bother you. She says you get tired too easy." My throat tightened. "You can always bother me," I said, patting the cot. He climbed in beside me, the springs squeaking beneath his small weight. He leaned his head on my shoulder, sipping his juice. For a moment, I felt the warmth of belonging again. But then Marissa's voice called from the hallway, sharp and annoyed. "Eli, where are you? Come on, we're taking pictures." He slid off the cot reluctantly. "Bye, Grandma." And then he was gone. The garage was silent again, except for the hum of the refrigerator on the far wall. I stared at the ceiling, tracing the cracks in the plaster like maps leading nowhere. My fingers curled around the quilt. I thought of my mother, who once told me, "When you are no longer needed, they will make you disappear, even if you're still alive." I had never believed her. Until now. That night, long after the guests had left and the laughter had died down, I heard Marissa walking through the house, heels clicking against the hardwood. I heard the dishwasher hum, the faucet run, a cupboard shut, and then silence. I lay awake in the garage, my breath shallow in the cold. Somewhere in the house, my daughter was sleeping soundly, dreaming of the empire she was building. And here I was, the woman who had built her, reduced to a shadow on a cot. I knew in that moment that something had shifted. A decision had begun forming, not out of spite, but out of survival. I could not live as a ghost forever. And that decision, though I didn't yet know where it would lead, would change everything. The morning after Marissa's celebration, the house smelled faintly of roses and last night's wine. Plates sat stacked in the sink, lipstick stains pressed into the rims of glasses. The laughter was gone, replaced by the steady hum of the refrigerator and the muffled sound of cartoons playing in the living room. I woke in the garage before anyone else, my body stiff from the cot, my breath a pale cloud in the chill. I folded my quilt carefully and set it aside. Then I sat for a long while listening to the house breathe, wondering how long I would go on pretending that this was living. Marissa appeared in the doorway sometime later, still in her silk robe. Her face was fresh, polished, as though the night before had not drained her at all. She held a coffee mug in one hand, the steam curling above it. "You were quiet last night," she said casually, as though I'd been sitting at the table with her, as though I hadn't been listening from the shadows. I didn't answer. Her eyes flicked around the garage, landing on the cot, the quilt, the stack of my old recipe books piled against the wall. She wrinkled her nose slightly, the way one does when they pass a stranger's trash on the curb. "Mom, I've been meaning to talk to you," she said. "We really need this space for storage. With the kids and everything, there's just not enough room in the house. Maybe you could, I don't know, think about other arrangements." Other arrangements? As though I were a suitcase too large to fit in her trunk. I said nothing. My silence seemed to irritate her. She sighed, took a sip of coffee, and left, the robe sweeping behind her like a curtain closing. When the door shut, I pressed my hands together to still their trembling. I had lived through harder things. Years of double shifts, nights when I wasn't sure how we would afford the light bill. Mornings when I sent Marissa to school with patched jeans because a new pair cost more than groceries. I had survived all of that. But somehow this stung worse. Not the hunger of poverty, but the hunger of being unseen. That afternoon, when the children were at school and Marissa was on a call in her office, I opened the trunk at the foot of my cot. Inside were remnants of a life no one here remembered. My wedding dress folded in tissue paper, photographs yellowed at the edges, letters from my late husband written in his neat block handwriting. I ran my fingers over his words. "You are the roots," one letter said. "We'll grow, but we'll never forget where we come from." Roots. The word sat heavy in my chest. I rose from the cot and walked quietly through the house. Each room held pieces of me, though you wouldn't know it now. The dining table had once been my pride. A thrift store find I sanded and polished until the oak gleamed. Now it was covered in store-bought runners and curated decor, no trace of my labor left. The curtains in the living room. I had sewn them myself when Marissa was a teenager. She had told me once they were the ugliest things she'd ever seen. Yet they still hung there, disguised under new tiebacks, as though they belonged to someone else's story. I stopped in the playroom, my old room. The walls were bright yellow now. A chalkboard covered one side. The bed was gone. Toys scattered the floor like confetti. I bent and picked up a small doll, its plastic eyes staring blankly. I remembered Marissa's dolls, soft fabric, stitched by hand, each one with clothes I had sewn from scraps. She had loved them until their seams tore. Now here was her daughter's toy, shiny and soulless, already discarded on the floor. I placed it back gently and left the room. That evening, Marissa's husband, David, came home. He was kind enough in the way men are when they want peace in their own homes. He nodded at me as he set his briefcase down, loosening his tie. "Evening, Mom," he said, though the word felt like a formality. He treated me more like a tenant than family, careful not to get too close, careful not to step on Marissa's rules. At dinner, Marissa spoke of work again, her voice animated, her eyes bright. She spoke of numbers, deals, meetings with people whose names I didn't know. I ate quietly, pushing peas around my plate. The children chattered between bites. David smiled in his quiet way, and I sat, invisible in the glow of the chandelier I had once saved up to buy. After dinner, I returned to the garage. I sat on my cot and stared at the quilt. The stitches were fraying in places, the fabric thinning. Time had worn it down, but it was still here, still holding its shape, still serving its purpose. Just like me. That night, I dreamt of my own mother. She was sitting on the porch of our old house in Stockton, shelling peas into a bowl. She looked at me with her sharp eyes and said, "Don't wait until they bury you to take back your voice." I woke with her words echoing in my head. The next morning, I rose early again. I brewed coffee quietly, the old way, in a pot on the stove, not the shiny machine Marissa bragged about. I sat at the kitchen table, sipping slowly, waiting for her to come down. When she did, she stopped short, surprised to see me there. "Morning," she said carefully, like someone stepping on a floor they weren't sure would hold their weight. "Morning," I replied. We sat in silence for a while, the air thick with unspoken things. Finally, she said, "Mom, I know this isn't easy for you, but I can't put my life on hold. I can't." I cut her off, my voice quiet but steady. "I never asked you to put your life on hold. I asked you to remember who helped you carry it." Her face tightened. She opened her mouth to respond, but no words came. She stood abruptly, grabbed her purse and left. The door shut hard behind her. I sat there a long time, listening to the ticking of the old clock on the wall. My hands shook, not from weakness, but from the weight of what I had finally said. It was not enough, but it was a start. Later that week, when she told me again that the garage would soon be cleared, I did not argue. I simply nodded, folded my quilt, and began to plan. Because my mother's words would not leave me. "Don't wait until they bury you to take back your voice." And I realized, I was not buried yet. This was not the end. It was the beginning of something else. Something Marissa could not yet imagine. The weeks slipped by in small, deliberate silences. I moved through the house like a shadow, watching, listening, waiting. Marissa went about her days, arranging meetings, ferrying the children to practice, decorating the home with the precision of someone who thought beauty could disguise absence. She didn't notice me most of the time, and when she did, it was with a glance that felt like checking a box. But inside me, something had shifted. The seed of decision had been planted, and it was beginning to grow. One morning, while she rushed to gather her things for work, she tossed a pile of old linens onto my cot in the garage. "Mom, can you fold these? I don't have time." I stared at the fabrics. They were my linens. The tablecloth I had embroidered by hand. The curtains from our old kitchen, faded but still holding the faint scent of rosemary from when I cooked for her father. She had stripped them from the linen closet without care, as though they were scraps, and dumped them on me like laundry. I ran my fingers over the stitching, each thread a reminder of who I was before all of this forgetting. I folded them carefully, each crease exact, the way my mother had taught me, and as I did, I whispered to myself, "Not scraps. Not yet." That afternoon, when the house was empty, I slipped into the study. Marissa's desk was immaculate, every file stacked, every pen aligned. But on the corner sat a photo in a silver frame. Her children at Disneyland smiling wide. Behind them, in the corner of the picture, I saw myself. Bent over, adjusting a shoelace, half cropped out by the camera's careless eye. I stared at that picture for a long time. The frame gleamed, polished, expensive. But the truth sat in the edges. Me blurred, half present, unwanted. I opened the drawer and pulled out a blank notebook. Its cover was stiff and used. I carried it back to the garage and set it on the cot. That night, by the glow of a single bulb, I began to write. I wrote about my childhood in Stockton, where the air smelled of almonds in spring. I wrote about the day I met Marissa's father at the corner store. The way he had carried my groceries, even though he barely knew me. I wrote about the first apartment we rented, where the ceiling leaked and the walls shook with every passing train. I wrote about Marissa's birth. The way I had sung her to sleep with a voice cracked from exhaustion, but rich with love. I wrote about the long nights I worked, the sacrifices I made, the joy I found in her smallest smiles. The words poured out like water from a broken dam. Page after page, memory after memory. I was stitching myself back together with ink thread by thread. When I finished, I closed the notebook and placed it beneath my quilt. It was mine, a seed of something larger. The next day, while folding laundry, my grandson Eli came into the garage again. He was carrying a broken toy truck, its wheel dangling. "Grandma, can you fix it?" he asked. I took the truck from his small hands. The axle had come loose. With a screwdriver from the shelf, I tightened the screw, smoothed the wheel back into place, and handed it back to him. "Good as new," I said. His eyes widened. "Mom just throws them away when they break." I smiled faintly. Not everything broken has to be thrown away. He hugged the truck to his chest and grinned. Then he darted out of the garage, leaving me with my own words echoing in my ears. Not everything broken has to be thrown away. That evening, while Marissa scrolled through her phone at the dinner table, I asked her softly, "Do you remember the quilt I made for you when you went to college?" She didn't look up. Vaguely. "What? I still have it," I said. "That old thing? You should probably toss it." "I mean, Mom, it's falling apart." Her words cut clean, but I swallowed them whole. I did not argue. I only nodded, because I knew something she didn't. That quilt still carried every thread of her childhood. Every night I stayed awake stitching by the faint light of a lamp, so she would feel cared for when she was far away, and I would not throw it away. Not ever. Later that night, when the house had gone quiet, I crept into the playroom. The toys lay scattered again, plastic and cheap. I stepped carefully around them and went to the closet. Inside, shoved into the corner, were boxes I recognized, boxes of my things Marissa had removed from the display. I pulled one out and opened it. Inside were photo albums, my wedding china, and a small tin that once held recipes written in my careful script. I traced the words on the cards, names of dishes I had made for her father, for Marissa, for birthdays and Sunday dinners. Recipes that had fed generations. I carried the tin back to the garage, holding it close like a treasure. Over the next week, I began to cook again. Not for Marissa, not for David, not for anyone's approval. For myself. I made small meals on a single hot plate I kept hidden. Lentil soup, cornbread, a peach cobbler just big enough for one. The smells filled the garage, leaving memories into the cement walls. And with each bite, I felt myself returning. Eli wandered in one afternoon, drawn by the smell. "Grandma, what's that?" "Soup," I said. His eyes lit up. "Can I have some?" I ladled a small bowl and handed it to him. He slurped it eagerly, his face lighting up. "This is better than Mom's," he whispered conspiratorially. I chuckled softly. "Don't let her hear you say that." But inside, my heart swelled. Word began to spread, quietly, among the children. They would sneak into the garage, one by one, asking for a taste of Grandma's cooking, asking to hear stories about when their mother was little. I told them about the time Marissa tried to cut her own hair, and ended up looking like a scarecrow. They laughed so hard they nearly spilled their soup. I saw something in their eyes that I hadn't seen in years. Recognition. Not of a ghost, not of a burden, but of a grandmother. And it was in those stolen moments, spooning soup into small bowls, that I realized I was building something new. A legacy, quiet and stubborn, stitched not in silk blouses or glossy photos, but in memory, flavor, and truth. Marissa, of course, noticed the children slipping away. One evening, she cornered me in the garage. "Mom, what are you doing in here?" she asked, irritation sharp in her voice. "Living," I said simply. Her eyes narrowed. She glanced at the pot on the hot plate, the bowls stacked neatly, the notebook beneath my quilt. She opened her mouth to speak, then closed it again, as though the words were too tangled. Finally, she said, "Just don't get in the way." And she turned, heels clicking, shutting the door behind her. But I smiled, because I knew something she didn't. I was already in the way. Not of her success, but of her forgetting. And little by little, I was making sure I could not be erased. Winter crept into San Diego slowly, with nights cool enough to make the garage feel like a stone cellar. I layered 2 quilts over my cot, stitched with years of history, and listened to the house breathe above me. Every sound was familiar by now. The hum of the dishwasher, the clatter of Marissa's heels, the laughter of the children as they ran through the hallway. But something had changed. The children slipped down to the garage more often, carrying their homework, asking for help with spelling, or just wanting to sit near me while I cooked on the small hot plate. They called it Grandma's Corner, as if it were a secret worth protecting. I began to tell them stories. Not lectures, not scolding tales, but truths wrapped in memory. I told them how their mother once painted a mural on her bedroom wall with stolen markers, swearing it was art, even though it looked like chaos. I told them about their grandfather's stubborn loyalty, about the neighbors who once gathered in our backyard for barbecues that lasted until the stars came out. I told them about work, real work, with leather and thread, hands raw but proud. They listened, eyes wide, bowls of soup warming their hands. They listened because no one else was telling them these things, because history had been packed into boxes and left to dust. One evening, Eli asked quietly, "Grandma, are you going to disappear one day?" The question sank deep. I touched his cheek. "Not if you remember me." That was all I needed to say. But memory, I learned, can also break chains. It was a Thursday when the envelope arrived. Thick, official, stamped with the seal of the U.S. Patent Office. I hadn't thought of that part of my life in years. The designs I once sketched at the kitchen table, the stitches I perfected with patient care. But there it was, a formal recognition of a process I had pioneered, a method Marissa had quietly used, without acknowledgement, in her business. I stared at the papers, heavy in my hands. For decades, I had told myself it didn't matter, that survival mattered more than credit, that silence was simpler than conflict. But silence, I now understood, was its own kind of theft. That night, I laid the papers on the cot and studied them under the dim bulb. They were not just documents. They were proof that I had existed, that my work had value, that my name could not be erased so easily. For the first time in years, I smiled without bitterness. The storm came quietly at first. A whisper on social media, a line in a trade magazine. Questions arise about design ownership in popular footwear line. Then the whispers grew teeth. Side-by-side comparisons, timelines, photographs of my old sketches. Someone had dug. Someone had found me. Within days, it was everywhere. Articles questioning Marissa's credibility. Former employees stepped forward with stories of belittlement, of stolen ideas, of a woman who had polished her image until it gleamed but left others in the shadows. And among those stories, threaded like a quiet drumbeat, was mine. Not as a headline, not as a spectacle, but as a truth that would not stay buried. Neighbors looked at me differently. Strangers nodded when I passed. One woman stopped me in the grocery store and whispered, "You reminded me of my mother. I left her behind once. I won't do it again." Letters began to arrive. Letters from daughters and sons, from women who had raised families alone, from men who had forgotten their mothers until it was too late. Each one carried the same refrain, "You matter. We see you now." And with each letter, I felt a little less like a ghost. Marissa tried to weather the storm. Press releases, apologies crafted by lawyers, statements about misunderstandings. But the internet is not kind to erasures. The clips resurfaced, her voice dismissing me, laughing at my absence. Those words turned into captions, memes, hashtags. And the brand she had built began to crumble. Not because I had torn it down, but because it was never built on truth. One night, long after the children had gone to bed, she came into the garage. Her eyes were hollow, mascara smudged. She sat on the cot without asking and held her head in her hands. "I didn't think it mattered," she whispered. I said nothing. "I thought, if I ignored it long enough, it would disappear. That you would disappear." I looked at her, my daughter, older now than I had ever imagined her, broken in ways success could not hide. And I felt no rage, only sorrow. "You can erase a name," I said softly, "but not a soul." She wept silently. I did not touch her. Some bridges can't be rebuilt with hands. Only with time, if ever. Months passed. The brand dissolved, the investors pulled away, and the headlines faded. But something else grew in its place. A small workshop opened in a quiet corner of town. Not big, not glossy. Just a space with wooden floors, shelves of leather, and long tables where women gathered. Women who had been told they were too old to work, too slow, too invisible. Women like me. I taught them what I knew. How to stitch soles with care. How to balance comfort with strength. How to leave a little of yourself in every scene. We made shoes, not for profit, not for fame, but for dignity. On the inside of each pair, we etched the same words, made by hands that will not be forgotten. And they sold, not because they were perfect, but because they carried truth. One evening, as the sun sank behind the hills, I sat alone in the workshop. A pair of shoes lay before me, dark brown leather, hand-tooled, simple and honest. On the inside, I etched my own name, Clara. Not for sale, not for anyone else, just for me. A reminder that I had lived, worked, loved, and left something behind. I placed them in a glass case, not as a monument, but as a beginning. Because legacy, I had learned, is not about who remembers you in headlines. It's about whose steps you steady when they are too tired to walk alone. And that, my dear, is how a woman like me, dismissed, erased, written out of rooms and memories, became the name stitched into the soul of a new story. Not with fury, not with spectacle, but with truth and with time. If this story touched you, if it reminded you of someone who deserved better, someone the world tried to erase, don't let it end here. Stay with us at Grandma Untold True Stories, where the quietest women in the room finally speak. Because revenge may have no expiration date, but neither does wisdom.